Good evening, everyone, and welcome in to the Large Program Tigers tonight. I am your host, John Maddox. We are going ace formation tonight, ace tight, two double tight ends, as I'm joined by the one and only Moss. Brian, how are you this evening?
Doing pretty good. Tigers are 2-0. Business is moving along, and that we have a man. Do we have an exciting game this weekend?
We do. And those of you wondering where the third member of our team is, he is in my personal hell, which is the Orlando airport. Larry encountering some travel delays this evening. And those of you who know me know my hatred for Orlando MCO knows no bounds. But enough about that. Let's get into this week. Memphis, of course, victorious 38-17 over the two-time defending Sun Belt champions, the Troy Trojans, on Saturday at Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. Brian, what were some initial thoughts for you from the game?
Initial thoughts were, to me, it was a clean game for Memphis. 21, what was it, 21-7 at the half, ending the game 38-17. I thought it was clean. Not the greatest game for Seth Hennigan as far as stats wise, but he did not throw an interception, which is a plus. Memphis finally got the running game going, 125 yards for Mario Anderson. That was great to see. He had 2 touchdowns. Memphis defense, still coming out strong. So overall, I would have liked to have seen, a wider gap in the final score, but overall, still, great game for Memphis, and it sets up, like I said before, it sets up for a great game against Florida State. But looking back at that Troy game, I can't really think of any real negatives. Third downs, you were 50%. I just don't see where you could pinpoint anywhere and say this was a negative for the Memphis team, against Troy. I thought overall, great game for the Tigers.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, I was there, and the only kind of negative I would say is they didn't cause as many turnovers. In the chat, I predicted my bold prediction was 5 turnovers, but they didn't do that. And the only play, I guess, that concerned me a little bit was Goose Crowder's touchdown run, where nothing was open and he got outside and there was no contain. And that's historically been a problem for Memphis. It's just you look and they didn't have to go for it on fourth down. They 50% on third down, had 26 first downs. They did have 7 penalties. There were a lot of penalties in this game. Troy had 6 pass interference penalties and 2 that Memphis turned down. And that's kind of got to be frustrating for players. Coach Cramsey talked about that today. He said, we'll take first downs any way we can get them. But I did notice that, especially Rock, he got kind of frustrated because, every time he would get in the open, somebody would just grab him. And, Coach Cramsey said that was probably their game plan because unlike pros in college, it's just a 15-yard penalty. And so it's better to give up, 15 yards than give up a 60-yard touchdown pass. I thought Troy was rugged. I thought, that they were a rugged kind of bring their lunch pail kind of team, and I thought they did. But like we talked about too, I think we all just kind of said, Memphis is eventually going to pull away from this because they have so many more athletes than Troy does. And there was a stretch, and I wrote about this in my column, that, from I think it was 3 minutes left in the first half to 8 or 9 minutes left in the third quarter, Memphis scored 21 points and really put the game kind of out of reach. And that's what you're supposed to do. I'm like you, though. I would have liked to have seen Memphis not pour it on, but maybe a little more offensive output. But, Seth was 20 of 32, 63%, 160 yards, had the 1 touchdown pass. And that was to Brendan Doyle, the tight end role in this offense. And then, again, we should all love something as much as Coach Silverfield loves Brandon Thomas at the goal line, 2 touchdowns there. But he, Coach talked about him yesterday and said he's just a guy that whatever we ask him to do, he does. if we need him to come in and take the first 5 snaps of the game, that's what he'll do with a smile on his face. If he said he's comfortable in his role. But yeah, Memphis, they did lose the time of possession battle. They held Troy to 101 rushing yards, but they were at 92 when Troy got that last kind of meaningless drive, or they were at 91 when Troy got that last drive, and they picked up 2 yards and then 8 yards, and then that finished the game. So, this defense continues. They play fast, and that's something I'm going to talk to Coach Hankins about when we talk to him tomorrow, is kind of what's the difference, because is it just players, is it scheme? Because it just feels like that Memphis defense just flies to the ball more and just plays a lot faster than they have in years past.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see finally a good see. I know before the season, I kept hyping up the defense and saying that this could be the best Memphis defense since that 2014 season, when they were was it 28th, ranked in the country, and right now Memphis defense is ranked 17th. I know it's early, only 2 games in, but you get that sense that this defense is something special. And I'd be interested in hearing what Coach Hankins has to say about what changed, because you're right. Is it not necessarily did they dumb everything down, but did they just simplify things for the players? And he said, I believe the players said during one of the press conferences that now that they're not thinking about what they're doing, they're just reacting. And yeah, it's definitely good to see. He's I guess out of all the off-season changes, whether it be players and coaches, I guess the best thing you could say that Silverfield done is put Hankins in that defensive coordinator role, because it's definitely paying dividends so far for the Tigers. You're muted.
Yeah, I know. I keep forgetting to hit the button. My keyboard's not right in my hand, so I don't remember the shortcut right now. So that Hankins has done a great job, but I am, yeah, and Jeb's right about this. I'll show this real quick, that the Troy coach showed his rear end. And I will say the people sitting next to me from Troy in the press box were no better. All they did was complain the whole game. And it's like, you're literally grabbing him as he's going down the field. That is the very definition of pass interference. And, Coach Silverfield picked up a unsportsmanlike penalty during the game, and he said it was because he felt they were taking a couple shots at Seth that they didn't need to take.
And the Sun Belt and the Troy folks can't complain too bad, because the coaches, I'm sorry, the refs were from the Sun Belt Conference. So it's not like it was home cooking for Memphis. It wasn't the AAC's refs.
Just as the game went, this was one of those games, I think, that kind of as it went along, everybody kind of knew what was going to happen. Everybody knew kind of how it was going to play out. And, it is what it is. You have to play through that stuff. But, Ryan said he thought that Seth got roughed up a little bit unnecessarily, but he said it was the first game where he was a coach where actually both coaches, because Troy's coaching staff got a penalty too. He said that's very unusual. Coach Cramsey today he mentioned again the pass interference, and he said, because somebody asked, how do you keep your guys from getting frustrated? And he said, well, even if they get frustrated, I just tell them, no matter how we get first downs, we just need first downs to keep the ball and move the ball down the field. So as we look through some of these more advanced stats here, and they're not terribly advanced, one that kind of total yards, 191. And when you're getting 191 yards up front and, on first down, boy, Brian, that opens the playbook up big time to, call basically anything on second down.
Yeah, and when you have a play caller like Coach Cramsey, I mean, it's he's just looking at his chops. I mean, I really impressed with his play calling. It reminds you of how Memphis used to play under Mike Norvell. I will talk about the Florida State matchup later, but it just reminds you of that play calling of years past, and it's good to see again. But yeah, 191 yards on first down. Man, that was great to see for sure.
And I thought Memphis mixed it up pretty well. They had that's that's kind of what and that's something that impressed me was Memphis had 133 yards rushing on first down, which means they're averaging right at 9 yards a carry. So that means basically every time you hand the ball off on first down, you end up in 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2. And as I said, that opens the playbook wide open. And 3 or 4 times is when Memphis would try to take a shot, and then the pass interference, you're getting first downs that way. Let's see, but it's funny because neither team had any penalties on first down. All their penalties were on 2nd and 3rd down.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, when Memphis got to 3rd down, they had more yards to go. They averaged about 6.5 yards to go, which is interesting to me. Memphis also, as a result of those pass interference penalties, they didn't really get to throw the ball, just averaging a little over 11 yards per completion, just 7.5 yards per attempt. Memphis gets 1 sack in the game. And I just thought it was, I hate to describe games this way, but it felt kind of meh as the game went on. Like I think everybody was thinking, all right, let's just get this over with. Troy is overmatched. They're not going to come back and win. And then Memphis kind of got in a shell a little bit where they didn't want to, show too much or get anybody hurt or anything like that. And those games are always tough to finish out. Another stat that always jumps off the page at me is rushes that are stopped for no gain or a loss. 26% of Troy's runs were stopped. And then, passing downs, Memphis converted 28% of the time, Troy just 23%. The field position rate, Memphis ran 62% of their plays from inside Troy's 50-yard line. And that's, Brian, that's a key for Memphis, is to give themselves a short field, especially when the passing game isn't hitting those big downfield shots and you're running the ball pretty well. It's a lot easier to call those types of plays when you're in plus territory.
Yeah, and another thing that I like seeing for this game compared to Memphis's first game, I don't remember like a lot of the mistakes, like drop passes or overthrown or underthrown balls. I thought Memphis played a tight game, and because of the way the game went, you didn't need to have Seth, throw it, downfield, a bunch of times or anything like that, because the running game was so on point. And, so why take unnecessary, risks like, throwing a deep ball or anything like that? Cramsey does a lot where he rides the hot hand, and the hot hand was the running game. So he just kept with it. And it was good to see. It was definitely good to see that the defense, Jeb with the special teams, no, shanks in the field goal or extra point or anything like that. So, yeah, the special teams was definitely much improved, against Troy.
Well, he said, Coach Silverfield said he really challenged them and they certainly were. And, every extra point was true. The one field goal attempt was true. Punting was fantastic. It's funny that last punt before Troy's last drive was downed inside the I think 2 or 3 yard line. And that's big and it doesn't matter where it happens in the game or whatever, but like when you can have opponents starting that far back, that really helps. And your point, Brian, no drops at all in the game for Memphis. Deep shots again, they were a problem, but a lot of that was due to the fact that Troy was just grabbing guys and pulling guys down. That makes it hard. Memphis had big plays. They had 10 for almost 200 yards compared to Troy. Sorry, Troy with their just 5 big plays for 9 yards. And, that's something that in these types of games that is pretty important. When you have a shot, when you have a chunk play, you have to take advantage of it. But here's how this game went. You look over there and you see Memphis only had 2 big plays in the passing game of more than 20 yards, and that was for a total of 46 yards. But 149 rushing yards gain on 8 plays, gain 10 or more yards. That's how you measure a big play. And then you hold Troy to just 5 combined. So, and then I thought, and we asked Coach Ramsey about this today, I think we kind of all looked at this as flat, as thunder and lightning with DeRosier was going to be the fast guy that could get outside and turn the corner and kind of be the bowling ball between the tackles. But when you saw that long touchdown from Mario Anderson, he busted that thing outside and got the score. And then, of course, he hurdled that poor Troy defender during the game. And I asked him about that. I said, where does that come from? He said, just pure instinct that I knew to jump in the air. But, you look at these big plays, 10 yards, 26, 12, 21, 10. And this, Bryan, is what I think we were all expecting from this Memphis running game when the season started.
Yeah, expecting and missing from years past. When you look at, like the 2019 season for Memphis, there was a bunch of big time plays, just big plays from the passing and running game. And now you see Memphis getting back to that form that they were back in 2019. Not to saying this is going to be that type of year, but it can be. And you have the players to do it. You have the coaching staff that's doing it. And yeah, DeRosier definitely impressed me too, Jeb. I was a little worried when Sutton Smith went down because I'm thinking to myself, man, are they going to go to a one back system, just rely on Mario Anderson? And obviously the answer is no, because DeRosier has shown something that it wasn't. I don't think it had Sutton Smith continued to be healthy. I don't think it would be a 2-horse race. I think that Memphis would have rolled out or thrown out all 3 running backs, 4 with Brennan Thomas always getting it in the goal line situation. But this is the type of roster that Silverfield has been gunning for all along. He has the horses. He has the players. And not to say that he didn't have it before, because the talent was there, but they're a year older. All these back-to-back best ever recruiting classes. There's the first appearance there.
Yeah, Duncan's first appearance on the podcast this evening. Probably won't be the last.
No, but the back-to-back best ever recruiting classes is starting to pay dividends. You see that these kids are now juniors and seniors, and it's boys that paying dividends for Memphis. But the big playability, that's something that was lacking, and it's here this year for Memphis.
Well, and when people ask me in the preseason, who's the key player, I've said, and I hold this, is that it's DeMar Blankenship, because he's the guy in the passing game that can really take the top off the defense. But DeRosier's got some speed, man. He can getting the backs more involved in the passing game. You had Mario Anderson picking up 23 yards on 4 catches. But man, here's what gets me about Anderson. I mean, he on that, he has 27 yards after contact, and Coach Ramsey called it contact balance today, right? Where you keep your, you get hit, but you kind of keep your balance and you hold up and you get more yards. And I just thought, you look down, Blankenship 20, Anderson 27, Lanphier, or is that what did Coach Ramsey calls him? Lampshade. Had 11, and Memphis had 87 total yards after contact in the passing game. They don't show that in the rushing game here on the stats, but yeah, just offensively, one of the things about this game were the drives. That's what I always scoring drives. Troy's 3 scoring drives were 13, 10, and 14. And then they had a 14 for their first and then a 12 for their second, but all the others were 2, 6, 6, and 7. That's to your point, Brian. That's where Memphis has to kind of get back to, I think, is that quick strike offense, because that's what they're best at. And I know Coach Silverfield would rather run the football, frankly. That would be his preference, but he's got so many offensive weapons that I think, what we were worried about in that first game, and to your credit, you told us to calm down and wait and let's see how it looks. Is the running game now going to become more, does he feel comfortable enough to trust the running game? Because much like a couple years ago and even last year with the kicking game and the kicking situation, what happens there is when you don't feel like you can trust, you go for it a lot on fourth downs if you can't kick the ball. So it kind of changes everything going into Florida State. Now, we'll talk about Florida State here in a few minutes, because they're a completely different beast, literally up front, than Troy was. But now you've gained a little bit of confidence. And before we get to Florida State, I would be remiss. How about Elijah Herring on Saturday? Like, man, that when they, you say, oh, that dude was everywhere. He was literally everywhere. And the tackles don't really fit how much he impacted the game. He had the sack, and then my guy forced a fumble, tackle for loss, and recovered a fumble on the same play. And, I don't remember hearing Chandler Martin's name, but he ends up with 7 tackles. Kobe Minor, I thought Kobe played a great game too. Had a tackle for loss. Had a pass, or actually didn't have a pass breakup, but he played outstanding coverage all coming down and helping in the run game. I think that's where Kobe really came through. And then, of course, Ross and Ruben. This is interesting. I like this position. They've got Ruben playing almost, I forget what they call it, Tiger or something like that, where instead of usually you have a hybrid safety linebacker, but this is kind of a hybrid corner linebacker. And it really fits Greg Ruben well. And my thing with the DBs is we didn't call any of their names on Saturday, and that's good because that means they didn't get beat deep. And that's, they didn't give up big plays. Any plays we gave up, Memphis was in a zone defense. And, Troy offensively, they didn't mix it up very much because they just weren't the type of team like North Alabama. They didn't throw everything they had. They played pretty base as well. The team that lacks confidence. That was the first thing that stood out to me, is they're just a team that just lacks a lot of confidence. And Memphis is gaining confidence. Does it surprise you that Cremonte Hamilton isn't really playing as much on the defensive side? Or do you think maybe that's a byproduct of other guys playing better?
I think it's a byproduct of other players playing better, because I penciled him as a starter when in my preseason article, like my depth, 2 deep depth chart, who I thought the starters were going to be. I had Hamilton in there. But, Javon Dennis, coming over from Georgia State, he's been playing pretty good. And the other spot, William Whitlow. I mean, that's a kid that Silverfield recruited, right out of high school. So he didn't transfer in from another college. And William has been a force. And when you look at the 2 deep from this defense, man, you got to be excited. You talked about Greg Ruben earlier, but even his backup, Bryce Edmondson, he had a fantastic game for the first 2 games when he had a chance to fill in. Yeah, that first game we heard a lot of Chandler Martin. This game we heard a lot of Elijah Herring. But even that first game too, the other linebacker, Matt Hudson, from Harvard, he had that interception, I believe, in the first game, and he was all over the field. So this is, man, the amount of athleticism that this defense has is just absolutely phenomenal. And, I've been giddy about it all preseason. I said it before. I'll say it again. This is definitely the best Memphis defense since 2014. That's a hill I'll die on. And I think that it will play out going on for the rest of the season. I know preseason, I was worried about a couple of games. And like I said, we'll talk about Florida State here in a minute. I was worried preseason game in the preseason about this Florida State game. after seeing the way the Memphis defense has been playing, I'm not as worried. But yeah, we'll talk about that later. But yes, man, a lot of players on this defense that has been just playing phenomenally. Davion Ross, the other cornerback, besides Kobe Minor, that's starting. He's playing well. I mean, you got a couple of shutdown corners, and the safeties have been playing great. Now, the caveat, I mean, have they really been tested? You could say, yeah, they really haven't been tested, but you only play the teams that are in front of you, and the two teams that they've played so far, hey, they've passed the test with flying colors. But this, I guess this Saturday's game will be the true test to see where this defense is at. But confidence wise, I mean, you can't say that this defense won't be ready.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's like the big thing is what these two games were supposed to do. They're doing right, which is building confidence. They are supposed to.
Yeah.
Yes, your opponent's a little. I hate to use the word lesser, but yes, your opponent is not as tough as obviously moving forward. But you have to, again, you're right. You have to play who you play, and there's probably, I'm guessing we're probably down to 100 teams that are, maybe less than that, probably 60. Well, I guess it'd be 50, 60 teams that are still undefeated, and you're one of them. And again, for context, it really doesn't matter because I tell people all the time, at the end of the year, they count the ones on the left and the ones on the right, and you want to have more on the left than you do the right. But, Memphis, again, they've done a great job. They've gone through, they've done what they were supposed doing, taking care of business in the games you're supposed to take care of. Now, are people a little surprised that Memphis didn't come out and score 70 points on Saturday? Maybe, but that's just not, Memphis fans just have to accept that's not really who Ryan Silverfield is. All right, so that'll wrap up our Troy discussion here. And when we come back, Pat Burnham from the Osceola will join us to talk all things Florida State. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Tigers Tonight. Welcome back in, and we are pleased to have joining us tonight Pat Burnham from the Osceola, who is the rival site for Florida State. Pat, how are you this evening, sir?
I'm doing great. We got a little cool weather for us in Tallahassee. We're in the 70s, a little bit muggy. It's going to be a little hotter on Saturday afternoon around 12 o'clock. They're expecting temperatures to be back towards the high 90s and heat index over 100. But yeah, thanks for having me, man. Got a lot of fond memories. My dad was a defensive coordinator at Memphis back in the late 70s with Richard Williamson. Okay. So have some fond memories of Memphis, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, that's pretty awesome. I didn't realize that. So Eric, our from MemphisWeather.net, he told me today, he's like, yeah, you won't get the same weather in Tallahassee we had last week. It was absolutely beautiful at Simmons Bank. It was, I think we were low 70s, no humidity. Yeah, that doesn't happen in Tallahassee until like November or December.
If we're lucky.
Yeah, right. So, Pat, I'm just going to start with a simple question, and I'll let Brian get more detailed here in a minute. What the hell is going on with the Seminoles right now? We are very, I can't speak for Ron. I'll just tell you, I am very, very surprised, not only that Florida State has lost, but how bad they have looked throughout the season so far.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing for FSU fans and even those of us that cover the program to wrap our head around. This was a program that Mike Norvell came out before the season and said it was his fastest, strongest, most explosive offseason with his players. So, we were expecting to see some of the same things that we saw, from last year's team, which the one thing that we don't get to see this team do in camp, and I'm sure Ryan does the same thing with the media like Mike does here, you get to see all the practices, none of the scrimmages. So, we saw what we saw. Like when I said Darrell Jackson was unblockable in practice, he was unblockable in practice. But yeah, listen, the way that they have gotten out toughed and out physical, and people have been able to impose their will on Florida State's defense and offensive lines, to be quite honest with you, has been surprising. The offensive line was supposed to be the strength of this team. I think if Silverfield is right, the most experienced offensive line in America. This is supposed to be one of the best defensive line units in America, at least those starting front forward. It just hasn't panned out. And listen, I think the other thing is we're all finding out that particularly programs that are going to dip into the portal, it could be feast or famine. Florida State had bumper crops the first 3 years in the portal, and it's been a meager harvest this year based on 2 games worth of evidence about who these guys have brought in and how they're playing. No one's lived up to the billing as of yet.
When I look at Mike Norvell at Memphis, I know a lot of fans didn't like that, the recruiting was in the 60s, or he wouldn't recruit or seemingly wouldn't recruit, high-end recruits or something like that, or couldn't get them. But he was phenomenal at finding the 2-3 stars and just blossoming them and coaching them up to a 5-star like Darrell Henderson. Yep. I mean, he was a 3-star kid that, he didn't have a lot of offers, but he came to Memphis and just exploded. I don't necessarily see that at Florida State. Is that surprising, or how would you rate, Norvell's recruiting since he's been there?
Well, listen, they've developed some kids like a Patrick Payton, the defensive end, who was a 3-star kid coming out of Miami. You've got a couple guys on the offensive line. Your 2 leaders, Darius Washington and Maurice Smith, they were recruited by Willie Taggart, but they developed under Mike, and they weren't highly recruited guys out of high school. So they have developed some guys. Now, listen, the NIL has kind of changed recruiting to a great extent. And I do know this, Mike is not going to be a guy that's going to recruit somebody strictly based off NIL. I mean, that's just not what he has done. My brother was on his staff for several years as a senior defensive analyst here at Florida State. He's not there anymore, but, I've talked to him on the record, off the record about this. Mike is he wants people that want to be at Florida State, like I'm sure he wanted to be at Memphis. Certainly, they've signed some high caliber kids like Hakeem Williams, who will be back for this game. First game this season. They got Brock Glenn, who was committed to Ohio State. They got Croman Hawk, who Georgia made a huge run at the end of the last recruiting cycle. So, listen, they have developed Shaheem Brown's a guy, the leading tackle on the team. He's another 3-star guy that they developed. So they've done it, and they've gotten guys like A.Z. Thomas, who was a 4-star coming out and probably their best defensive back. But yeah, I think he's done as good a job trying to navigate the NIL with the portal, high school recruiting, and I don't know how these guys are doing it. I really hope that they go to the 130-day window so that these guys can lock down a roster. Yeah. I think I think one of the things that's happened with Florida State, I don't think Mike or anybody else mapped out the perfect portal plan, but Mike was aggressive in it right away, right? And I think what we're seeing is that college football is catching up with those couple of programs that had early success in the portal. So I think what we're seeing is teams are having to find a balance between high school and portal kids, and not only from a talent and development standpoint, but also how do you money is becoming a bigger factor. Listen, you guys are going to find out about that with the FedEx money. Money's going to become a bigger and bigger factor now. For a kid, for one kid, it may be 10% of what's involved in his recruitment. For another, the money may be 90%. But I think this is the first year that you could say that Mike and his staff might have gotten it wrong on who they've taken, and I think that's one of the reasons they're struggling this year is because they hit with Jermaine Johnson and Jared Verse and Braden Fisk and Keon Coleman and Trey Benson. I could go on, and they have not hit with the guys that have been brought in this year. Malik Benson is your third leading receiver. He's probably your best offensive portal guy. And then you got Cam Riley, who they didn't bring in until June from Auburn, and he's third on the team in tackles. And my understanding background is they weren't sure where they were going to take him all the way into June. So I just think it's been a different year for Florida State. I think it's been a different year for the staff, and as far as who they thought they were going to be, and I think that's been part of the struggles this year. And then guys, as you well know, when you start bringing in 40 new faces to a locker room, chemistry is going to be different from year to year. And I think we're going to see, particularly at the bigger levels of football, where there's going to be drop-offs, just like in the NFL. We're turning it to an 8-4, the ACC. I think most of the majority of the teams will be somewhere between 7-5 and 8-4 this year. That's just what we're turning it into right now. And I think that's part of what's going on at Florida State right now.
Are you surprised? I know Norvell, in his time at Memphis, always had an excellent quarterback. He's known as a quarterback guru. Are you surprised by the way DJU is playing?
I thought he would play better under Mike than he has anywhere else, because I do think that Mike has been. I think his history he's as a play caller speaks for itself. I think he adapts to what he has. I know you guys are probably familiar with the year they were 8th in the nation in rushing. After the previous year, they were one of the top 10 passing offenses. But as you mentioned, those great running backs he had, Darrell Henderson, Antonio Gibson. I think there was one other dude on that team. Mike's always adapted. I think that they thought they might. Listen, I think every coach thinks that he's the answer to a player that's been inconsistent. Coaches are ego guys. There's nothing wrong with saying that. My father was a defensive coordinator for 50 years in college football. My brother coached for 25. I was on staff at South Florida for 7 and in football operations, and every coach on our staff had an ego, right? I can turn this kid into a player. I'm the guy that can get to him. That's what they think. That's their DNA. And, listen, unfortunately for DJU, he is below his career completion percentage in 2 games at Florida State. He's completed 57% of his passes. That's really low in today's RPO-driven offenses, where you can find a lot of open receivers, intermediate, short game. And listen, there just does not seem to be a spark with DJU in this offense. And I'm as baffled, because I said that, Mike will find a way to win with DJU. Mike will find a way to fit DJU into this offense. And particularly when you think you could get him behind a strong offensive line and running game, which is what we thought was going to happen, and not have to rely on his arm every play. And of course, what we've seen through 2 games is they tried to rely on the run against Georgia Tech, found a passing game when they had to have it on that last drive, and then they revert to the passing game against Boston College on offense. And listen, he made some throws, but he missed some very, very important throws, particularly a couple that would have gone for touchdowns or first downs. And he didn't get a lot of help from his receivers, quite honestly, against Boston College. 6 or 7 drops that were just should not be dropped. But yeah, I'm surprised that he is. I really thought with Mike and Tony Tokarts here, I thought they would figure it out with DJU, and at least through 2 games, they have not.
So you were talking about the running game, Pat, and it came out today. Jalen Lucas now out for the year. How does that impact the offensive side of the ball?
Well, we did a podcast today, and thanks, John, for coming on. I know you're going to be on ours on Thursday. But, listen, I don't think what most people understand is Jalen Lucas in camp was one of the most explosive offensive players in all of camp, for going back to the start of camp. Like, I thought he was going to be a guy that was going to probably be one of your top 2 or 3 yards from the line of scrimmage guys on this team, whether it was passing, running. He was a smaller guy, but boy, when you saw him in the first time I saw him, I thought he was a walk-on, but this kid just goes streaking down the sideline after catching a pass out in the flat. And I was like, who the hell is 13? And somebody goes, well, that's the kid from Indiana. I was like, holy cow. And he impressed all the way through camp. And he's going to be a footnote to this season, but he is a bigger loss for this offense as it struggles to find its identity than most people think. He could play at running back. He could play at slot. You could bring him in on jet sweeps. He was not afraid to run between the tackles. Now, they did not use him as much as I thought they should have in the first 2 games. He only got 4 touches total on 7 snaps against Georgia Tech, but it's going to be a bigger loss than what most people think. The good news is they do get one of their receivers back, a highly recruited kid named Hakeem Williams, who was one of their bigger prospects signed 2 years ago. And they need Hakeem to come in and help spark this offense.
I think John may be frozen, so I'll step in here. Talk about just the rest of the coaching staff, like Coach Fuller. I know he had some fans in Memphis don't think too highly of him because of the way the defense is. Yeah, he's unfrozen now. But so how does FSU fans view the defense under Coach Fuller?
Well, last year they were very happy with him.
Yeah.
As you guys well know, it's what have you done for me lately? Right now, listen, I don't think there's anybody in the Florida State fan base that's happy with any of those coaches right now. I mean, they were told this was going to be a good team. They were told that they were going to keep it rolling, and what we have seen has been uncompetitive and unprepared football teams. And listen, when Boston College lines up in condensed sets and say, we're not even going to fake trying to throw the ball. We are going to run at in the A and B gap to either side, and we're going to do it you can stop us, and they could not stop them the whole game. It's the same thing they had against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech didn't throw the ball to come back and win that ball game. They methodically marched that ball down from the 20 down to wherever they kicked the field goal from. And I think there's a lot of frustrated people with Adam. And listen, the good thing is for Adam and Mike, you get on a 2 or 3 game winning streak and get to Clemson and everything's better. But yeah, right now the natives are restless in Tallahassee. There's a lot of upset people about how this team has started. And as you guys have alluded to, and everybody I've talked to has alluded to, it's not that they're getting beat. It's how they're getting beat. That the Georgia Tech game, it shows as a 3-point football game. But if you went back and watched that game and never looked at the scoreboard, you're going to assume that's a 35-10 football game. And Boston College very easily, guys, could have been a 41-13 ball game. Also could have been a 28-21 ball game. But anyway, listen, it just has not been good. This team has regressed. It reminds me of the 2022 team as opposed to the 2021 team as opposed to either of the last 2 teams we've seen.
So let's move. Larry, our partner in crime, isn't here, so I feel like I have free reign tonight to talk about special teams a little bit. He thinks all kickers are idiots. I tend to not agree with that most of the time. Talk about Ryan Fitzgerald. Struggled a little bit this year, just 12 of 20 on field goals. And the number, as I'm looking at your stats, that jumps out at me, just 3 out of 6 between 30 and 39
that can't that be this year. That was probably
maybe last year.
Yeah, that was probably 2 years ago.
It says 2024, but hey.
Yeah, that's he's perfect so far this year. In fact, you guys want to know, I write a column every Tuesday. I'm not a big op-ed guy, but I write something called Takeaway Tuesday every Tuesday. It's my reaction each and every week, knowing that I can change my opinion. So the next week, based on what happens, but I said where Florida State is right now as a football team is your best player on offense is your place kicker. He kept you in the game against Georgia Tech with a 52 and 59-yard field goal. And then your punter, Alex Mastromano, who's the guy that kept him in the game against Boston College by pinning Boston College deep twice, one of which Florida State should have gotten points out of. But no, you're right about Ryan. He struggled, and he was getting booed a lot, but he had a much better year last year, and so far has not missed a kick. And unfortunately, they have not gotten in position enough to let him kick more than he has. But Ryan's kind of turned the corner. But certainly there was it might have been last year. If not, it was the year before that. But he used to get booed mercifully, and he's come a long way, and he's a much better kicker than he's really hit his stride later in his career. And like I said, kept him in the game against Georgia Tech.
As I'm looking through your stats here, too, just really jump off the plate at me. The time of possession. I mean, Florida State's, negative 10 minutes per game. And that, that's just mind-boggling to me. And then third downs, that's where Florida State has really struggled. So what do you think, especially on the offensive side, what do you think, is that a product of DJU not being able to throw the ball? Is it a product of, first down, you're not getting your third and long?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of what you said. I think they're not having much success on first down, so you're putting yourself in a third and long situations a lot. The receiving core is not near as good as it was last year, and they're having a hard time getting separation. Now, listen, Kyle Morlock had a couple drops to tight end against Boston College that are abnormal for him, just wide open passes, first downs where hit him in the hands and literally dropped to the ground. But listen, it's, listen, the pass protection has not been great. Your two very experienced offensive tackles have given up more sacks, given up inside leverage, which it's a cardinal sin if you're an offensive tackle to give up inside leverage. And, your two most experienced players should not be doing that. It's not any one person. It's, DJU certainly has struggled with accuracy. That's been his case his whole career. But like I said, he completed 50% of his passes against Boston College, so he's 57% for the year. Again, you can't miss a wide open receiver in the end zone. He's done that, but the receivers aren't getting open. The running game is non-existent. I think that is one of the reasons they're bad on third down. Nobody's having. And here's the other thing, guys, and I think it's. I've tried to explain this to people, and it's an overstatement in the way I try to illustrate it. But when you go from Jordan Travis, who is one of the most dynamic players in all of America on the offensive side of the ball the last couple of years, to DJU, it's almost like you're giving a gap back to the defense, right? Because I don't care whether Florida State was running the ball with Jordan Travis or throwing the ball. Everybody on the field had to know where Jordan Travis was. If you went man coverage and turned your back on him and he took off, he was going to be up on top of you in a heartbeat. So I think that's part of it. I think Jordan Travis hid a lot of stumps in Mike's offense last year. Not that there were a ton, because they were really, really good. But I think he hid some of the stumps on the offensive line. And I think Mike and his staff, to be quite honest with you, are trying to figure out what they want to do with DJU and Mike's offense, because it was run heavy the first game, pass heavy the second. I'm hoping that the 2 weeks they've spent getting ready for Memphis and getting ready for the long haul that this will be this year, that they've kind of narrowed down on what they're going to try to do with him in this offense.
Sorry, I was muted. Last one for me. How much do you think? I know both coaches have talked about it. It's not a Mike versus Ryan deal, but I mean they're close friends. I mean they were on staff together for years. Do you think that will play any part of it going into this game?
Well, I listened to Ryan's interview, and he mentioned that they know each other like the back of each other's hands. And you can listen. Ryan's been here. We get to go to football camps during the summer, and Ryan's been here for 2 consecutive summers. He's probably been here every year Mike's been here, but I've noticed in the last 2 years. It's clear they know each other very well based on what Ryan said. Now, I didn't listen to Mike's press conference. We got a whole crew to cover that. But I did. I'm more interested in the opponent. I know what's going on here. I don't know what's going on the other side. Yeah, listen, I think it's going to be, they're going to know things about each other. That, like he said something the other day on the second series, Mike's going to have a trick play in his bag or go for it on fourth down, those type of things. I think it's going to be, I think they could both just play their hand and, be very conservative. Now, listen, I think if you're Ryan Silverfield, you're really geeked up for this game. I mean, you're taking Memphis into Florida State. My read on him during that press conference and all the great things he said about Florida State, it was almost Lou Holtz it wasn't Lou Holtz the guy that everybody was great. Everybody was going to beat Notre Dame. And, he's talking about all these offensive linemen at Florida State. They're going to go to the NFL. And I'm looking at the roster. I'm like, who's Silverfield talking about? So I think he's got some confidence. But yeah, listen, I think it's going to mean a lot to both of these guys. You know how it is when, you go back to growing up and you're playing basketball against your one-on-one against your best friend. And, it was more serious than if you played against your most bitter enemy, right? I mean, you wanted bragging rights. And listen, they clearly know each other well. I think that's a fascinating part of this. I think my read of things is Ryan's probably a little bit more conservative than Mike. I could be wrong on that. That's just from what I've watched of the Memphis offense under Ryan, but I think they know each other well, and are they going to try to get into a game of wits? I don't know. I don't think so. I think both of them want to go home with a win, and Lord knows Mike, after going for it on fourth down in the first drive of the third quarter, I'm not sure we need any more surprise play calls or anything like that over here in Tallahassee. But yeah, I think that's a fascinating part of this matchup because, those guys know each other well. Obviously he knows Adam Fuller. They practice, that to me, that is the fascinating battle because those two guys went head to head every day in practice, right? Because Silverfield was the offensive line coach and coordinator. So those guys were going against and back in the old days, used to get pretty heated between offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators. No team practices the way they used to, but there used to be a battle on Tuesdays and Wednesdays on the practice field between the offense and defense and the two coordinators. And so I think that's actually the fascinating battle, because I don't think Ryan calls plays, but I'm sure he's heavily involved in what they do on offense there, because I've heard him talking about being involved in play calling. But I think that's the more fascinating matchup, is Adam versus Ryan.
Well, and I was reminded today that Adam actually coached with Tom Cramsey at Marshall. Okay. They were on staff together there for a year. So, yeah, there's so many subplots. I'm obligated to ask, how is and where this is going, right? What is going on with conference realignment, Florida State, Clemson? And I hate to bring it up during the season, but it is kind of the 1,000-pound elephant in the room. And, frankly, Pat, how do you see this shaking out at the end of the day?
It's funny as you mentioned it, because we were talking about how the lawsuit is affecting recruiting at Florida State, right? Because they lost two of their biggest commitments over the weekend. And I'm of the thought that the lawsuit is working against Florida State on the recruiting end, because they're going, the administration and board of trustees has come out and said, as long as we're in ACC with this grant of rights, we're playing at a disadvantage against SEC and Big Ten programs. So I think that's being used against them in recruiting. They're using FSU's own words against them. I think because FSU, listen, the ACC and FSU chose to go to battle with each other within about 24 hours. ACC filed the first lawsuit in Charlotte one day later, followed by a lawsuit by FSU against the ACC in Tallahassee. It's been very public. I don't think it's been a very good thing for Florida State. As we said today, Florida State planted itself as the flagship program of the ACC along with Clemson as far as football is concerned, and then you start the season 0-2. Now it's killing your recruiting. You can't tell me what's going on with conference realignment, and Florida State not finding a home is not having an effect on their recruiting, right? So I've always said it was going to be the Big Ten. I don't think the SEC wants Florida State. I think that they want to go to Virginia and North Carolina and take two whole states out and all the dollars and cents that come with those television rights and marketing and merchandise and all of those things. I think Florida State's future is either in the Big Ten or Big 12, or they try to put it together with the ACC, but that seems to be past repair at this point based on some of the things that have been said. But I think, we had our little round table today, and, I said, Florida State's got to get some traction on this the SEC and the Big Ten are not going to mess with Florida State until this lawsuit thing is somewhat been settled, either gentleman's agreement or legally binding agreement. But I've always said it would be the Big Ten. I don't think it's the SEC. A lot of people think it's going to be 2026 when they get out. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen as quickly as people thought it was. I think maybe they played their hand. At the end of the day, to be honest with you, I'm not sure any of us know what's going on with conference expansion. Yep. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw Kyle Winningham about 4 weeks ago before the season starts saying in 6 months to 4 years, we're going to have 2 super conferences. Is Kyle right? Are we going to have 3? Are we going to have 4? I don't know. But I know for Florida State to get back to where it wants to go, it needs to have some traction either in knowing it's going to the SEC, knowing it's going to the Big Ten, knowing it's going to the Big 12, but they need to answer. And they, listen, they've got the success initiative in the ACC going now, which is what Florida State wanted, which is more money to the teams that qualify for the playoffs. The better you perform, the more money you get out of the bucket. And of course, what do? They come out of the gates and go 0-2. So the whole thing is it's not. The energy around this program is not great right now, and what they need is they need to get back on track and start winning some ball games. But yeah, I think the expansion question is something that's lingering over this program, particularly when you involve the lawsuit and all the expansion talk.
All right. Well, along the lines of getting back on track, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think the outcome of Saturday looks like?
Well, when I flipped on ESPN today, or ESPN bets, and I saw that Memphis was an 8-point underdog, I was wondering what film Vegas has been watching, because not only has Florida State not looked good, but you guys found a running game against Troy that you did not have against UNA, which is baffling to me and something I'm going to ask you about on Thursday. Because I would have thought y'all would have run to West Virginia and back against UNA, but you didn't. You did that against Troy. So, yeah, listen, I said this football team is going to have to prove it to me, because you are what you put on film, right? And Memphis has been a better football team on film. So if you had to ask me today, I'm leaning towards Memphis until this Florida State football team proves that they can be a tougher, better football team and not just get whipped on a weekly basis. I don't see how you don't pick Florida State to lose based off what they've done in their first 2 games. Now, I'm a Florida State grad. Now, I've also got the benefit of having worked in college football for 10 years, and so I don't see things as a normal fan would. I've been fired on 2 staffs. We got fired at South Carolina. We got fired at USF. I know how this thing works. So I got out and I had a little experience. I didn't stay in Tallahassee, so I think I have a little bit more balcony view of what's going on right now. I'm not micro focused. But right now, listen, I don't understand. I'll put it to you this way. I don't understand how Memphis is the underdog. I don't make my prediction until Friday, but right now I'm leaning towards Memphis.
All right, Pat, we'll tell our fans how they can keep up with you and catch up with all things Florida State.
Yeah, you can go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com, and you'll get we got practice reports that are in front of the paywall. So if you're a Memphis fan that wants to learn about Florida State at practice, we're at Florida State Practice Daily. I've got my Takeaway Tuesday column. We got all kinds of recruiting news. Of course, I know you guys aren't as concerned about that. And obviously, you can follow me on Twitter at or X or whatever we're calling it these days at Osceola Pat. But listen, I think it's going to be a fun ball game, guys. I really do, and I'm looking forward to asking you some questions on Thursday, because I want to know more about Mario Henderson, and I understand he was a Harlan Hill finalist when he was at think Newberry or Presbyterian. I can't remember where he was before South Carolina, but listen, I think y'all have a very, very athletic and physical defense, and I'm looking forward to learning more about you guys on Thursday.
Awesome. Well, I'll talk to you Thursday and hopefully see you on Saturday.
All right, guys, y'all have a great night, and appreciate you having me.
Appreciate it, Pat.
Pat Burnham from the Osceola website for Florida State. And interesting, I don't know that we've ever had a guest who's a former coach. And I didn't know his dad was a defensive coordinator. That's crazy.
I guess had I known, his dad coached for Memphis, I would have asked him more about that. But it's great to see. And what was it? He said South Carolina and South Florida. So Pat's a great guy. He was a good guest.
Yeah, that is a good guest. I'm not old enough to remember Richard Williamson's staff. There are some viewers to this program that probably are, but and it's funny because he was kind of the last coach that left here, I think, to go somewhere else and didn't get fired before we've had our recent run of success. So, Brian, as I look at this, my big worry is, and Ryan has talked about this repeatedly, that it seems like, I think it's 7 of our remaining 10 opponents have a bye week before they play Memphis. And, that's kind of my thinking is, number one, you've had a bye week, and maybe that has settled everything down. And then number 2, if Florida State's not pissed off on Saturday, then they've got much bigger problems than being 0-2. And that's my worry, that we are walking into an absolute hornet's nest on Saturday.
Yeah, and we didn't get into it with Pat about the stats, but when you look at the stats, I mean, one can easily say, let's take a look at FSU's offense. Oh man, they're 116th in the nation, 62nd in the pass, 128th, in the running game. Defensively, they're 83rd in the nation, 123rd against the run. But I mean, take that with a grain of salt, because their strength of schedule is 11th in the country. Memphis is 101st. So you can look at the stats, and I've said it before. I mean, this defense has been great. They're ranked 17th in the nation right now. But you went against weak teams. So to me, this is the game that it's a, I don't want to say make or break for Memphis because it's not, but perception wise, if you're going to be the team that is going to go to the college football playoff, I don't think you have to win this game, but you have to have a good showing. You have to put up a good fight. So, we'll have our predictions here in a minute, but this is an outstanding opportunity for Memphis. It's not that you lose, it's how you lose, but it's not how you win, just that you win. So there's a lot of storylines in this matchup that I think this is. I know it's not a conference game, but to me, this is the game of the year because of everything that's involved. The national perception that's going to be put on this program. Because look, you have NIU that upset Notre Dame, so a lot of eyeballs came away from Memphis and is looking at elsewhere. I mean, you had Texas State destroy UTSA. If Memphis can win this game or at least keep it very close, you'll have some eyeballs that will come back to Memphis instead of looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And I think, the difference to me is the NIU thing was a little bit of a surprise. But hey, hats off to them. That's, whether if they go, 2-10 this year, they can always say forever, we went to Notre Dame and got a win. And, we asked Coach Silverfield about that. And, we get the coach speak, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's just the next game. We don't, and I'm sure when we talk to Seth tomorrow, he will say, we don't look at the other sideline. It's about us, which is not true. And because these are kids, right? Like they know each other. We were joking today at the media day or at the press conference with Coach Ramsey that, Brock Glenn is the most popular guy in Tallahassee, Florida right now, being the backup quarterback. But they, to me, Brian, they have bigger problems than quarterback. And Pat brought it up and Pat was 100% right. They have been pushed around. They have gotten whipped up front. And, the way Georgia Tech treated them over in Ireland reminded me as I'm watching that game, that felt very, very much like that Memphis UTSA game when Memphis got ahead 21-7 and UTSA just kind of kept coming and pushing Memphis around and, took advantage. So I told Jonah Dillon and Frank Bonner today, I said, this is one of those rare, and Avery, I said, this is one of those rare games. I got nothing. Like I'm going to make a prediction here in a minute, but I mean, this game, I do think, and I think I say this a lot, I think it's either going to be a blowout or a last possession game. I don't think this is a middle of the road type of deal. I mean, I guess it could be very similar to the Troy game the other way where, Florida State's, because what I look at is Florida State is still bigger, stronger, faster, right? Like this is the only game this year where I feel like Memphis is, this a word, out athleted. Like I think Florida State probably has better athletes, but I think then the other side of that is, what was it Nick Saban said on game day Saturday? It was so funny. I forget who they were talking about, but he said, y'all are talking about $20 million NIL rosters and fast guys and all that. And he's like, if you don't have the right roster and the right fast guys, it don't mean shit. And I pardon my language, but it's right. They feel like a team right now. And, I wanted to ask Florida State about this, but, they got beat last year in the bowl game 66-3. And everybody's like, well, they didn't have their team. Well, there were still some guys there that happened to. And then they go, the first game against Georgia Tech in Ireland, they looked woefully unprepared. And last week, Brian, they just got beat. Like there's no other way to put it. They got out coached, they got outplayed, and they just got beat. So, has Mike and Adam Fuller and the staff, have they got it to a position where they can, they've kind of got the ship righted and they've settled down, and, then it comes into quarterback. If DJU comes out and struggles for 3 series, do you go to Brock Glenn? Because my thought process on that is, well, number one, people have told me Brock hasn't looked great in practice, but if you go to him, how do you come back to DJU if he doesn't perform? And a lot of this, and it always does, if Memphis struggles, the blame goes to Seth, whether, it doesn't matter who it is. It always kind of comes back to the quarterback. But he has been so bad. Now, they have a lot of other problems, but he has just been awful. But again, week off, Mike Norvell, still one of the best play callers in college football, one of the best in-game coaches. How does he respond? And, the other thing I asked Coach Silverfield and I asked Coach Cramsey today, they played at Missouri last year in the Dome. We had Mississippi State a couple years ago. This is going to be the most hostile environment Memphis has been in a while, I think. So
for a long time, yeah.
Yeah, how does Memphis respond to that? How do they respond to going in against an angry team with a rabid fan base, or is the fan base kind of beaten down? And because if we're being real, with a team like Florida State, Brian, with their expectations, their season's done. They're 0-2 in the conference, and they're not making the playoff at this point. So how do those kids respond?
Yeah, and man, this is such a fascinating game because I so bad want to pick Memphis because Memphis can win this game, and it's, to me, it's more, the pressure is obviously is on Florida State, and when I look at this game, I can easily see I don't see a blowout by either team. In my opinion, it's going to be a close game. I think the odd makers has 6.5 point or 8 point spread.
Depending on the line, 6.5 to 8.5.
I think it's going to be a 3-point game. I really do. I see something like 27-24, maybe a last second field goal. But what I envision in this game is both coaching staffs trying to outsmart the other. You always say the smartest man in the room syndrome. How many times have we seen Mike do that at Memphis? How many times have we seen that in the first 4 years, under Coach Silverfield? I think both staffs are going to have a moment where fans are going to be like, "Why'd you do that?" I think there's going to be plays like that. Now, I think there's going to be some big plays as well. To me, preseason, I would have. Yeah, I think I even said on the podcast, I think FSU wins big. But now I'm just, to me, it's going to be a close game. It's a tight game. Florida State can't get out of their own way. And Memphis has surprised me by the way they've played, but they haven't been challenged. And FSU, like you said, they have obviously it's going to be one of the most talented team, maybe the most talented team that they'll play this year. So it's just a fascinating game all around. I see John's trying to get back in here. My prediction for the game, I'm torn. I've already said it's going to be 27-24. It depends on the day. Some days I say Memphis wins 27-24. Sometimes some days I'm like, no, it's still going to be FSU. I'll go because preseason I said FSU is going to win. I'll stick with FSU winning 27-24, but I would not be surprised if Memphis, especially if they score early, take the crowd out of the game. I can easily see Memphis winning 27-24. To me, this is a toss-up game. It really is. I guess if this game was in Memphis, I'd pick Memphis. But because it's in Tallahassee, and I'll pick the Seminoles because one thing, Silverfield does not have a great road record. He has a losing record on the road. Let me try to pull this up here real quick. Yeah, on the road, he's 8-12. So that's one thing going against him. Another thing is the heat. He doesn't do well in temperatures that are in the 80s, and it's going to be in the 80s during the kickoff. He's 6-5, in games in the 80s. So those little things just sway my opinion a little bit towards FSU, but close game, 27-24.
I guess that's me. Man, this is tough. It's going to be hot. It's going to be sticky. I think Deb has the point, and you said it as well. I told everybody today, I think this game is won or lost in the first 8 to 10 minutes. What Memphis can't afford is Kickoff to Florida State scores a touchdown. Kickoff to Memphis turns it over in their half of the field. Florida scores again. Memphis gets the ball back, or Florida State. Memphis gets the ball back, goes 3 and out. Florida State scores again.
That keeps that crowd in there.
That's what Memphis can't do. Memphis can't be, as I used to call it, get beat before you get off the bus. That's what Memphis can't do. I think having such an experienced senior-laden team and a lot of fifth year, like a lot, and you've also got guys, and I don't think you can discount this. You've got guys, Mario Anderson's been in big environments, Elijah Herring's been in big environments, the transfers from Indiana have been in. So you've got guys that have played in these big environments before. You don't have a bunch of guys from, like Matt Hudson from Harvard. You have a bunch of guys that have played, Mario Anderson's played in some big games before. So you've got that going for you. I think the other thing that's underrated here is the in-helmet communication, because when that crowd gets loud, you've basically got 20 seconds to get the play in. Now, Seth, of course, has to communicate that to everybody else, but I don't know, man. This one's got me, Brian.
It is. Like I said, I went back and forth because it's like, man, you could easily see Memphis winning, but you can also see Memphis losing. It's such a fascinating game. And I've said it before, I think both coaching staffs will have a moment where there's like, I shouldn't have called that. Just a stupid decision. I see both staffs doing that. I don't think there's many players on the Memphis staff that was here. I mean, on the Memphis team that was here when Mike was here. Maybe a few. Jonah Gamble, maybe. So most of the players, they're Ryan's guys. So player-wise, you won't have, not to say that it happens, but kids are human just like the rest of us. You don't have that attachment of remembering Norvell when he was on staff. So these are Ryan's kids, and I know Memphis is going to be up for it. And we've said it before. This defense, I think we'll know how the game's going to go. Like you said, in the first 8 to 10 minutes, if Memphis can somehow score early and get that crowd down, they could easily win this game. But if they don't get the crowd out of the game, I don't want to say it's going to be a long afternoon, because I think it's going to be a tight game. But it would just behoove Memphis to score early and get that crowd out.
I said earlier, my bold prediction was Memphis was going to beat Florida State. So I'm kind of like in your boat. I feel like I've got to stick with that. I've got 35-31 Memphis. I think this is going to be a little high scoring. And I think we see Brock Glenn for Florida State. That's my bold prediction.
Oh, I do too. Yep. And I think, that's why I love this matchup, because if you do have Brock in there, and I think Memphis will prepare for Brock and DJU. That has to favor Memphis. If you're bringing in Brock, that to me that spells bad news for Florida State, and Memphis will just be, licking their chops. The defensive line for Memphis is much improved. The linebacker core has been great for the past 3-4 seasons, so I'm not worried about them. The DBs are much improved. So the matchups that I'm looking at is the Memphis defense for the versus the FSU offense. The Memphis offense, can they establish the running game? Well, obviously they should be able to, because Florida State's been terrible, trying to stop the run, but they are good against the pass. So if anything, I want to see how Seth Hennigan in the passing game will go up against the Florida State defense. But if you're Memphis and you want to go to the college football playoff, beating FSU will go a long way. Like I said before, it takes the eyeballs off of everybody else and puts them squarely back on you, and you'll have those expectations of this is the team that's going to the college football playoff.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for us. I look like I'm frozen again, so I hope you can hear me. I'm having internet trouble. Who knows? So anyway, we will be back next week. I am headed down to Florida State on Friday. I'll be there for the game on Saturday. Brian, what do you have for us this week coming up on Tiger Sports Report?
Yep, we will have the final grades from the Troy game. We'll also have the Throwback Thursday, where we compare the starters for each team and what they were coming out of high school, and some more pro football focus articles about each team.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And remember, if you like the podcast, to like and subscribe. I always forget to say that. You can join TigerSportsReport.com. Cheaper than a couple cup of coffees a month, and get all the inside scoop and all the details on all things going on with the Memphis program. So for the best co-host in all the land, Brian Moss, and I promise I actually have fiber. I don't know what's going on here, but and for our missing piece tonight, Larry Marley, God bless you, sir, dealing with again,
Orlando.
Place. One of the reasons I'm actually driving, oddly enough. So anyway, for Brian Moss and Larry Marley, thanks to Pat Burnham for stopping by as well. This is John Maddox signing off. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see everybody next week.